Hello and welcome to update 1.2 of Mr. Mannequins Tools. There's quite a lot of stuff to go over in this update, so I'll try and keep it as quick as possible. But first of all, there's a few things I need to talk about. To start with, there's a lot of people who are messaging me with questions about Blender and how to do this, how to do that, weight painting, rigging, why this works, why this doesn't work, and I just don't have the time to reply to everybody about the same few problems over and over again. So I'm going to be drawing a stricter line of what I help people with and what I don't help people with. So if I turn around and say to you, hey, you're going to have to go do some independent learning, go watch a YouTube tutorial or something, please don't be offended. I'd love to help if I could, but I just don't have the time. I've also got Patreon set up, and the more people who become patrons for $3.50 a month, the more I can improve the workflow with this add-on for Blender 2, Unreal Engine in general. So the more time I can allocate, the more people donate. It's great all the donations being given on Gumroad, but they kind of only cover some of the work that I do each month, as opposed to Patreon, where you can contribute every single month. So that's that. I'm going to be adding some patron exclusive content next year, early next year. I'm going to be making some game ready assets with really open licenses for anybody to use in their projects. So that's spoken about. I'm going to be doing a Q&A live stream about the add-on and about Blender 2 Unreal Engine in general the day after this is uploaded. So you should be able to find a link in the description below to the scheduled live stream for that. And let's get on with this. So there's a few things that have been added in this, and the retargeting for custom character armatures is quite long to explain, so I'll do that last. Let's go through the smaller bits first. The thing that everybody is the most excited about in this update in particular is the addition of the female mannequin. So let's get her loaded up and I can show her and explain a few things about her. Let's Miss Mannequin, SK femmequin. So this is sort of the first iteration. I'm not completely happy with all of the geometry and all of the UVs and stuff, but it's good enough for everybody to start using. And I'm pretty sure that she comes under the UE4's EULA license agreement because she is a derivative of the Mannequin. She uses the same textures, she uses the same materials, she uses the same armature, the same everything. I've just edited the mesh. So yeah, she was created from the Mannequin. She's his female duplicate. She's a derivative of him. So she should be covered by all the UE4 starter content license stuff. So, Miss Mannequin, there she is. That's what she looks like. She does have breastbones. To get those active on a freshly loaded rig, you're going to need to come here and there's this character option. This is still a work in progress and it's going to be used by a much more advanced character creation system that I'm working on for this add-on. So you're going to want to set that to Miss Femmequin if you're using the female mesh, and you're going to want to set this to Mr. Mannequin if you want to export the male mesh. This whole variable thing is, this property is all going to come together in future updates, but for now this is just the basis of it. I've started work on morphable characters and stuff, and I'm going to be putting a lot more options in the rig options here in order to use that. So that's that, and she's got breastbones. I haven't set up proper breast rigging for them yet. They're literally just bones that will deform and export to a UE4 standard with the center of the mass for each breast. That's pretty much it. They kind of want to, there are a few different ways you can rig breasts to get different points of rotation and create like bouncy animations, but I haven't implemented any of that yet. I'm still working on the rigging for that and how I'm going to present it in a menu here alongside this character system. So that's Miss Mannequin. That's her all spoken for. Probably the most exciting thing for me about this update is the changes I've made to the animation export script. I've made a couple of changes in there and I've improved its accuracy and its compatibility. It's a much better piece of script now and it's a lot more performance friendly. So yeah, I've improved that, and I only improved that the other day, and that's definitely become the most exciting thing about this for me. So that's just something to mention quickly. Animation should now export much more accurately. I'm working on changes to the import script to do the same thing, but they're not quite ready yet. There's also a couple of other things about the import script to go over as well. there's this option here, key location. So some animations coming from Unreal Engine have offset keyframes of the location on things like the twist bones and the balls of the feet. Currently the script is accounting for the upper arm twists, the lower arm twists, and the balls of the feet. So it won't key location for those bones, but it will key location for everything else. So I wouldn't actually advise using this. This was a testing variable, a bit like I did before with the visual keyframes, which I ended up chopping out. This is a testing variable here, testing option for me, and I'm going to vastly improve on this so that you can actually select which bones get location keyframes and which don't. This all comes down to the way that Unreal Engine handles skeletal animations. Sometimes they have their targeting set to skeletal, sometimes it's animation. If their targeting is set to skeleton, then they won't process any of the location keyframes in Unreal Engine, but when the FBX is exported, all of those location keyframes are still coming with them, and obviously Blender doesn't know that. So I'm going to set up a similar thing for that, like maybe an enum or a selection menu where you add in the names of the bones that you don't want location to be keyframed on. So for now, I'd suggest leaving key location on and just not doing anything with it. But I'm going to be working on that and making the script more performance friendly and more compatible, just like I did with the export side. So that's that bit spoken about. What's next? I've added a socket system here. So let me just save my blend file. And let me load up the gun to give an example of this. FP gun skeleton. Load that. And then we'll load the gun mesh. Wherever we are here, SK FP gun log 0. Load the mesh. And so there's this little socket system I've added in here. This is pretty open to all the objects in your blend file. So like obviously if I select the mesh here, I still have this socket menu there. But for the gun specifically, for rigged weapons, for weapons with skeletons, you're going to want to be using the skeleton to attach it. So this gives the ability to attach things to sockets. What I've done to the default armature here is I've actually added in the grip point socket in a blender fashion as a bone that doesn't get exported, so that if you're working with first person animation, you can accurately attach the first person gun mesh and armature here to, let me just select the skeleton, to the grip point. If I can find it here, there it is. So pretty massive enum. This kind of works a lot like I'm doing this to kind of try and emulate the socket system, the socket menu in Unreal Engine when you're in a character blueprint. I want to be able to emulate that. Currently, I don't have the whole snap to target, snap to world situation. So currently, it just snaps to world, but that's acceptable for what I've got set up here. So we can snap the gun to the grip point, and we have a boolean here, which we can just tick, and it's attached. And that is how the gun appears, and that is how it is attached in Unreal Engine. That's really exact. I've done everything down to several decimal places for the rotation and location of this socket bone. So that's that. You can add in your own socket bones. Just make sure that they do not have their deform setting checked, so that they don't get exported when this is false. And yeah, just go nuts with it. It's kind of up to you at the moment to set up the sockets and then to set them up on both sides. But I am going to be looking into importing and exporting sockets from Unreal Engine. I'm going to be looking into it. I can't promise how well it's going to work. I know it can be exported from Blender. I'm not sure how. I don't think the sockets can be exported from Unreal Engine. And if they can't, I'm going to try and find an easy way of you putting in the information needed to be able to create them Blender side. So that's the socket system. You can turn the attachment on and off. Obviously, you don't want to be exporting anything that's attached. It kind of needs to stay at 0 when you're exporting that. So you'd export the animation however you want, export the character, but don't export anything that's attached unless you've turned off its attachment bool. So yeah, that's the socket system, and that will work for anything in the blend. You can kind of attach anything to anything, and you don't have to set a sub-target. That can be left blank, and it will just attach to the point of origin of the target. So let's move on to the retargeting system. Now I've got a few examples for this. because it's not the easiest thing to explain how it works and what it's doing, so it's better to just sort of show it. So what I've made here is a really, really basic skeleton with some slightly dodgy proportions. This is an armature that I've created in Blender. I've just created it and I've assigned a bunch of meshes to it. That's how let's set this to slightly see-through so we can see what's going on a bit better. Each of these spherical objects represents a bone and they are weighted to those bones. So I can rotate the mesh and stuff. This armature is obviously missing the fingers and the balls of the feet and any other extra bones, but this just serves for a really basic example of how you can, how I'm currently implementing custom character workflows. So these are our meshes and this is our armature. What we have in the object menu here, if we have an armature that is not my mannequin rig, then we can click the Start Retargeting button on it. That will start the retargeting process that I've come up with. What that does is it loads a template of the mannequin's control bones. It doesn't load all the deformed bones, it just loads all the bones that I need to be able to set up all the IK chains and set up the foot gizmos and all of that stuff. So it creates those bones by name. And that's another thing I'm not sure if I mentioned, but it's really important, so if I did, I'll repeat it. The bones in the armature that you want to retarget to must be renamed to the mannequin's naming convention. So Spino 1, Spino 2, Spino 3, Neck 1, head, clavicle L, clavicle R, upper arm, lower arm, calf. You get the idea. All the bone names need to be named to their equivalent mannequin bones because there are so many different ways that other animators, other riggers name their bones. I needed to pick a convention, and this is the convention I've picked. I might work on compatibility with other things, and I will probably add in other templates as well, so T-poses and things like that for more commonly used animation armatures, such as things from Mixamo. Now, this retargeting system is slightly similar to the Mixamo's retargeting system, if you've ever seen that, except instead of selecting the little circles and very carefully placing them, what you would do is you would set up your character, and the armature that you're retargeting to is essentially you placing those circles around, and then when you load my rig here on top of it, that's then snapping to that and it's stretching to it and it's deforming it. So this is the template bones. These are all the template bones I need to create this retargeting system. That's the mannequin's default template bones. I've duplicated them, and they're now, and in pose mode, they're being set to this example armature's pose. And there's a few options to go over with this, particularly about how it works. Let's go into pose mode on it, because that's where we do everything. So what we're doing is we're essentially retargeting using pose mode and a whole bunch of constraints that do specific things for different bones. So as you can see, there's a whole bunch of options here. So let's pick a bone at random. Let's take the pelvis here. Let's start from the top. The rig options here. This is affecting how the target armature is being displayed. Here we're affecting how the template armature is being displayed. I often start with the shapes off, get everything set up to be where I want it and how I want it, and then I turn the shapes back on in order to change their scale or to change their shape. So that's kind of what's going on here. I'll come back to the force rotations and locations afterwards, but the idea is that you come into this pose mode, you turn off the shapes so you can see what's going on a bit better, and you'd then get these bones into positions that you would be comfortable with. So let's start with this clavicle bone here. In this menu down here, we have inherit rotation and inherit scale. That's not so relevant here, except the rotation you can change. So these are all just options. By default, all of the bones are going to start with no inherited rotation when they get pinged into place, but you can always turn that on if it makes it a little bit easier. And you can rotate all the yellow bones, which are bones that think they know what they're doing, but they don't always. So you can rotate those, but don't be editing any yellow bones in pose mode, in edit mode, sorry. So don't edit any of these yellow bones. These are the bones that think they know what they're doing. So what they're doing is they're picking up the equivalent bone name in the target armature and using stretching IK to point themselves to it. The point of rotation is they're snapping themselves to the location of that bone, which is often very important. Even if the deformed bones have come from Unreal Engine and the deforming bones are pointing all over the place. This is the idea is to set this up to stretch between the bones and create a rig that can be animated in Blender no matter which way the bones are pointing, which I'll show shortly on a more difficult retargeting example. So we've got this bone, we can change its Y rotation to whatever would fit the mesh. I haven't set up spheres for the clavicle here, I thought I wouldn't bother. So we can set this to be whatever we think it should be for the mesh, maybe tweak it slightly this way, and for the lower arm here, we'll tweak it slightly that way, so it's more in line with the mesh. That's the idea of it. And then we come to the purple bones. These purple bones only have a point of rotation. They're not using IK stretching to get to where they should be. And we could change this. So if there's a constraint down here, you can change the targets. So if I wanted this to stretch straight to the hand, I could just change the name of the IK stretch 2 to hand L. So that's going to stretch straight to the hand then, which isn't necessarily what we want this to do, but the controls are all there so you don't have to go faffing around through all the constraints. And the more bones you select, the more control options you'll have down here. For each bone that you have selected, they'll pop up. Back to the purple bones, because I forgot to mention that. We have purple bones. These are bones that will need checking. They are either end bones, so bones at the end of a chain, or they are bones with multiple children. So I have no way of setting the tail position by default of these bones. There's no point in space for me to snap to. So you're going to have to come through on these bones in particular, and you're going to want to maybe put inherit scale on so they fit the stretching of the arm. And then you're going to want to rotate them into position for the mesh that you're using. So I'm just going to try and do that here. Set this to local so it's a bit easier to manipulate them. There we go. So you're going to sort of set those where you want. You don't really want to be changing their point of rotation, because that's quite specific. There's only a few times that you might want to change that, and that's only for the twist bones, which again I'm going to have to come back in a different example. I've got two more retargeting examples. It's quite a detailed process to go through, but it should be able to make most of your characters quite compatible. So let's just copy this pose across to the other side so I don't have to rotate the hand bone the same. There, and that's the idea with that. So what we do now then, applying the retargeting. So we've posed all of these bones how we want them to. Now, what we're probably going to want to do, actually I should set inherit scale for this guy too. There we go. What we're going to want to do is go over these two options here. So these are options for specifically for characters that have different proportions to the mannequin but the same bone rotations. So for instance, if you had the mannequin in a T-pose, ticking like this armature is here, and we tick the force template rotations before we apply, when we hit apply retargeting, it's forcing it into the equivalent rotations for that armature to then fit the mannequin, and it's also deforming the mesh, applying the mesh's new deformation, merging the armatures together and creating this, which is all these blue bones here. I can select a blue bone. This might not let me. He likes the purple bones. Yeah, it creates the same mechanism for exporting to Unreal Engine that I use on the mannequin himself. On this particular armature, all the bones were kind of pointing in the right direction anyway, so it's not that big of a deal, but you might have armatures with bones pointing in all kinds of directions, maybe from Maya, from wherever, and this should be able to handle that. It doesn't care which way the deformed bones are pointing. It only cares about their point in space, their head location. So we have applied it, and this has put this into the mannequin's pose for me. It's also added on my rigging for the IK and all the options that we would need. So let's go back again, because I can do a bit more with this before I move on to a different example. Let's undo, there we go, right? So that's forcing template rotations. If we didn't force the template rotations, all we'd end up with is a rig in this position, is my rig in this position with all the IK ready to use. It sets up the pole targets correctly and all that kind of stuff. That's why I need to use a template, because I have to create all the bones off specific bones for all the mechanisms in the armature, for all the rigging. A lot of it's very dependent on what bones are where and what position they're in. Like the pole target must be moved precisely on the x-axis and be a duplicate of the upper arm. That's just how it goes. So yeah, If we don't apply it, we end up with this. If you do have a armature in a different pose to the mannequin, so if it's not in an A pose, or maybe the arms are twisted differently, you're going to probably need to come in here and change the bones IK stiffness limits, particularly the limits, maybe the stiffness as well, to get things flowing right, to get things working correctly. I might work on doing that automatically, but it's kind of a tricky thing to figure out, so I'm going to have to, I might put some time into that, but you might need to come in here and change the limits to better suit the new position of the armature. So I'll undo again and come back, because we can also force the locations, which is another thing I want to explain about. So we can force the rotations of the armature, so that should mean for easier retargeting once in Unreal Engine. So Unreal Engine side retargeting wants to be quite compatible with the mannequin's rotations, because it's mainly just taking the rotations of an animation and putting them on the mannequin armature or vice versa. So if we rotate everything to the mannequin's rotations, despite the different proportions, things should still retarget quite well in Unreal Engine. Forcing the locations would further help that, but is very likely to deform your mesh in a way that is undesirable. With this example, it's not too bad, because as you can see, the meshes are all just separate spheres, they're separate body parts, they're not really connected. But with a connected mesh, this could really mess with the shoulders and the connection with the legs and the hips and stuff like that. So be very careful using the force template locations, though it could be used in a myriad of ways if you need it to. So if we force both of these, we end up forcing the armature and the mesh to fit the mannequin's position. So that's in edit mode and everything. That's not quite happy with the way the IK targets have been generated, but that's probably down to the stiffness not being quite correct, or maybe the pole targets. No, that looks okay there. Maybe I'll have a play around with that and see what's going on. But yeah, it's mainly when you change the locations. Oh, that's why, it's because this is up here. So as you can see, because I've changed the locations, but I haven't changed the size of the bones, that becomes a little bit tricky to figure out. So maybe there needs to be a force scaling as well. So literally what this does is forces all the bones into the same locations of the mannequin, as well as the same rotations if you do both of them. So you can do one or the other. I just wanted to leave it really open for options. So coming back one more time, let's just quickly finish off this retarget with this little example. Coming back to here. So what I'd do is get all the bones in roughly the position I want. Let's say I'm not using either of these two options. Then we'd turn back on the shapes, and we'd then set the custom shape scale however we want. Maybe add in different shapes for different things if we need to, because extra bones do get processed and will get added. So we can kind of change the shape and change a lot of things about these bones. I think that's all I need to go through about this basic retargeting. Now let's do this with something a bit more advanced. I'm going to show the import, because we can now import meshes. We just need to have an armature selected. There are a few reasons for why you need to have an armature selected to import the meshes, even though if you have nothing checked here, it makes no difference. It will just import the mesh and its armature and everything in the FBX for you. But in order to be able to rig to active if we want, so if you have a character that's very accurately rigged to the mannequin already in Unreal Engine, you can just tick rig to active, and all it will do is it will import the FBX, get rid of everything you don't need, and assign the mesh's armature modifier to target my rig instead. That's what rig to active does. It's pretty straightforward. If we're not rigging to active, we have an import to retarget option, so we can jump straight into retargeting, but that's only available if we're not batch importing, because obviously you have to do the retargeting process individually for each mesh that gets imported. There's no way to automate that system. So we can import to retarget, and I'm going to use Quang's Male Base, which is a product on the Epic Marketplace, on the Unreal Engine Marketplace. Quang's Male Base, I'm going to use that. It's very closely rigged to the mannequin, but it's not quite perfect, and it gives a great example of the twist bones and how they need to be set up. So I'll import the SK Male Base FBX, and I'll jump straight into retargeting it, which will do that. And I'm going to need to let's hide my other skeleton there so I don't get confused. So we've got Kwang's male here, and it has a facial rig. So these pink bones here, which you haven't seen yet, are extra bones. There is absolutely no way I can tell extra bones what to do unless they only have one child. If an extra bone has one child, it will target that child and turn yellow because it thinks it knows what it's doing. So we have all these extra bones here. These extra bones, I would suggest just sort of rotating them. I'd avoid changing their locations at all costs. We don't really want to be changing their locations, but rotate them into a position or go into edit mode and snap the tails however you feel most comfortable animating with these bones. So maybe we'd want to snap this bone here to that bone's head there. Maybe we'd want to snap this bone to there, and then maybe we'd want to take this bone and just sort of rotate it on its x-axis and by 180, and then maybe sort of scale it so it's a bit smaller, so it's not so obvious. Yeah, so we'd have sort of a situation a bit like this. So you rotate these bones, snap their tails in edit mode wherever you need them to be, and set things up. They have their points of rotation that you can always change, but they will always try to copy the rotation of the bone that they're supposed to. So what we can also do with these is we can add in custom shapes. If you've already loaded my mannequin rig into the blend file, you'll have access to all the custom shapes that he has. If you see shapes with .001, probably don't use those. They're likely to be got rid of. They shouldn't have any users, and they should get cleaned up when the blend file gets loaded. I have had a bit of problems recently with getting rid of these shapes when I'm loading more than one armature, but really it's just a little bit of data cleanup that I need to work on for that. So maybe we'd set this to, I don't know, a sphere or something. Set this to a sphere, wherever my sphere is, B shape, sphere, and then we would change the scale of it slightly. Do the same thing with this one. Maybe this would want to be a sphere as well. And then change the scale of it slightly. And then maybe this one would want to be the bracket shape there for the middle of the eyebrows. Yeah, so you set up all these extra bones however you want to animate with them. It's completely up to your discretion how you set these up, where they're pointing, what they're doing. There's no way I can dictate that for you. That will require you to do some of your own learning about rigging in order to set that up, if you don't already know it. So that's the extra bones. Now these twist bones, let's talk about the twist bones. Let's turn off the custom shapes and talk about twist bones. So for the mannequin, the thigh twist is here in the middle of the leg. That's actually a really difficult place to animate it with. What I do to fix that is, let me come into object mode, have only this selected, and I'll even hide the mesh. The best way to fix this is to have them, these are going to want to be snapped to where the thigh is actually rotating. So we need this to be local, snapping is on. So that would be G, Y, and snap. So the twist bones can have their location changed, but you're only really going to want to change them on the Y-axis. If you need to change them on any other axes, then you probably already know what you're doing with rigging, and you don't need me to explain what an offset twist bone is. So yeah, this is kind of up to your discretion. You wouldn't have to do this, but for it to work, for a humanoid character's thigh twist bone to work with my rigging, that's where it needs to be. So I'll do that for the other thigh as well. Just up on its local Y-axis, snap to there. And the lower arm twist bones are a little bit different. They are a little bit similar. So the upper arm twist bones is also the same score. If they happen to be in the middle of the arm, you're going to want to slide them up their Y-axis to fit where they're supposed to fit. With the lower arm and the calf twists, their rotation is generally controlled by the hand because they control the twisting of the wrist. So what they have is another constraint down here. Instead of the stretch 2, they have their Y rotation is replaced by the Y rotation of the hand. That's so that when we apply the retargeting, they automatically have the correct bone roll for their target, for the target of the constraint that's going to control the wrist's rotation. So yeah, if you don't want to mess around with twist bones too much, this is pretty much what you need to do. With the lower arm twist, you can kind of move it around wherever. It should really stay where it's supposed to on the point of rotation. But for Kwang's character here, I'm going to pretty much just leave it like that, I think. It doesn't really need to be pointing directly to the hand bone. It just needs to have the correct roll in order to copy the y-axis. So that's that bit talked about. That's the twist bones. So I will apply this retarget. Let's turn his mesh back on. Let's turn that mesh back on. And then when I click apply retargeting, and then we can hide the deform bones, we have my rig. Obviously the IK hand root is over here for some reason. I'm not sure why that's there. It probably shouldn't be. I think maybe something's getting a bit confused. I'll have a check of that before I upload, but I really can't afford to do another recording of this video. I don't have the time. So that should be fixed. I'll figure out why that's there. That should really be on the floor somewhere, but it's not. So let's hide that and ignore that for now. And it looks like the same thing's happened with the foot as well. I've probably just messed up a condition in the script somewhere slightly. So that's all looking okay. There are now pivot bones for the twists, for the lower arm and thigh twists here. There's a few reasons for me adding these, but they could come in useful on different rigs. And this is the retargeted Kwang's Armature with all of my rigging set up on it, with the hands, how Kwang would like them, how they're rigged, how they're supposed to be, and we can add head tracking. It's all going to work. We're probably going to want to turn off some of these armature layers that we don't need to have open for animation anyway. And we can, if we turn off snapping, we have the head tracking system that's going to work correctly with this mesh and all of that stuff. So that's all going through as it's supposed to. So now for the final example I'm going to do with this, just to quickly show the extra bones and how they turn themselves into bones that think they know what they're doing. I'll just show that really quickly. There's Boris. Sorry, I got a bit spaced out then. I've got a little white dot on my shoulder and I wonder what it was. A little piece of fluff. I just spotted it in my camera. Boris. Here's Boris. He's a Paragon character, and my retargeting script will even work with him. So if we select his armature, we'll have the start retargeting button, and we can start retargeting with him. Now he has a lot of bones in his rig that aren't present in the mannequin, although he is labelled as rigged to the mannequin. That's because his bones are at an equivalent rotation to the mannequin's bones, at least the ones that are in the mannequin skeleton. So, retargeting with Boris, there are a few. I wanted to show the extra bones that come in. So these are actually extra bones, but because they only have one child, they're using the IK stretch to snapping system that the other bones are using. Let's turn off shapes so we can see. We have that there, and they're all pointing roughly where they're supposed to. Again, all the extra bones, they're really up to you to rig. You're going to want to rotate them to whatever position you feel you might want them at, and then add in a custom shape for them. This would look good with the bracket. So that you can then animate these bones correctly, Blender style. So that is about all I needed to show. So I'll show you, actually, I'll tell you what, I'll show you what will happen. So if we force the template rotations, this is going to force Boris into these rotations here that the mannequin uses, which isn't too far off the ones he's currently using. But if I apply the retargeting like this, it should deform his mesh to a more mannequin-like pose, which it does. And that's deforming it correctly. That's not using the location, so it's not going to cause any problems. However, if we come back to retargeting, if we force the locations as well, this is going to squish and deform the mesh in possibly a quite undesirable way. So let's apply it like that. As you can see, it squished everything right in. Let's hide the deformed bones so we can see what's going on. You can see this is him literally rigged to the mannequin, and it does not like it one little bit. So there is that. That's how this goes. You can see it's deformed the mesh in a pretty terrible way, which we wouldn't want it to be. So yeah, you're going to need to be careful with that locations option. Maybe don't really use these locations unless you know the character is of identical proportions to the mannequin himself. I will be adding more templates for this system, so T-poses and other things as well. And I will also be adding in a system for you to add your own templates to it, as well as adding in armature stashing, which has been a long time coming. But I needed to figure out a lot of other things before I could start letting people stash armatures, because there's a lot of properties that need to go backwards and forwards, a lot of parts of the script that would need to talk to each other for you to create your own custom armatures that can be loaded just like the mannequin. And last but not least, I want to give a big thank you to all of these wonderful patrons here. These guys are what's making it possible for me to put the time in, for me to do this. They're helping me with testing bugs. They're helping me set things up with GitHub. These people are amazing. Come and be one of them and help the Blender to Unreal Engine workflow get better and better and better, up until the point that Blender becomes the standard for working with Unreal Engine. I hope you have a great day.